Welcome to another Samso Insight, where we bring you stories which really is from the industry. When I've got a really interesting story here today, is probably one of my favourite topics, and I've got the author who wrote the book about the whole Olympic Dam story. We're here in Adelaide now talking to David Upton, who is the author of the Olympic Dam story. And look, the Olympic Dam story is really about Western Mining Corporation and the way they've gone about it. So it's really not a story about mineral exploration. It is about the psyche and how things went about. But look, David, thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you very much, Noel. Thank you for your interest in the book.
Yeah, look, I've got hold of this book probably around 2011, 2012. You published it in 2010.
That's right, yes.
And I'm over the moon that I'm having this conversation with yourself, because it is a unique story. Maybe give us an intro about who you are, what you are, and then I'll share with us how this whole process started.
Yeah, sure. No, well, again, thank you for the interest. It has been over 10 years since the book came out, and it was quite an intense labour at the time. I think I've spent over about 18 months, probably not all that, 50% of my time perhaps in that 18 months, but it was a very intense and interesting period. It came about, well, myself, I have a geology degree. I went to Flinders University here in Adelaide back in the 1980s, and I enjoyed geology. I'd always been interested in it. I'd even had something to do with Western mining prior to going to university. I was lucky enough to have work experience with Western mining in 1980. I must have been 15 years old, and they took me down to the core yard at Lonsdale and put the radioactive badge on me and things like that. And it was all a bit, awe-inspiring and amazing. And that was good for a couple of days. But so I went to university. I did geology. Enjoyed it a lot. At the time I left, there weren't a lot of jobs in the industry apart from in the oil and gas game, logging mud. So it didn't seem very appealing. I just happened to stumble into a job in journalism with the local paper here in Adelaide, and that kind of distracted me and diverted me down another path altogether for about 20 years, doing journalism, public relations, media and things like that. And it was a bit of a fluke. I was in Melbourne. I had an office. I was working for myself at that stage, but I had an office in a building, and it was a Herald Sun building in Melbourne. And I'd come and go every day, excuse me. And I just happened to see RV Parbo coming and going every day as well. And I don't know why, but that just triggered in me the whole idea that I'd love to know how Olympic Dam was found. How did it get there? It was this deposit that I'd kind of grown up with, the discovery and the evolution of Olympic Dam. It had been a huge issue in the media here for years because the government didn't want to allow uranium mining. There was all kinds of news every day and dramatic scenes in Parliament, and things like this as to how they would ever allow the mine to go ahead. So all those years later, I thought I just really would like to know what happened, and I had the time as well to do something. So I approached RV absolutely cold, with no history really with Western mining or anything like that, and said, I want to write a magazine article, a couple of thousand words about Olympic Dam and how it was found. And he said, yeah, sure, come around to my place. And so I went to his home, met the great man over tea and Tim Tams. He was a very hospitable host and a lovely man. And he spent about an hour and a half with me, and we talked. And I went away, wrote the story, 2,000 words of how it was found, and it became a starting point again for me to write about minerals. I'd started in journalism writing about mining, but it veered off into other directions. So he sort of re-sparked that in me, and he said to me at the time, he said, look, he said it's a great story, someone really needs to write it at some point, because we're not going to be here, forever. And that was in 2009. So I didn't feel like I was up to writing a book at that point, but about a year later, I thought, why not? I've got the time to do it. I went back to him and said I'd like to do it, and he offered to give me some financial support to do it, which was absolutely fantastic. But even more so was his willingness to get it down on record, and he was a great man for keeping records and reading and books, and just a really, really fascinating and lovely person. So he helped me through finding contacts with Western mining people, opening doors to really talk to all of the people. Jim Laylaw, Roy Woodall, Douglas Haynes, Hugh Rutter. All the really key guys in that story. And then also a lot of the production people and others, Hugh Morgan. So that's how it all came about. And it seemed to be that I just had something of an affinity, I suppose, with the Western mining culture, and so I had a lot of respect for how they operated and what they did. I mean, you'd hear all kinds of stories about. I ended up going to a couple of Western mining get-togethers, in subsequent years. Actually, they had anniversaries every year. I think they still do. And you'd hear stories about just what a fabulous place it was. People would, not literally, but people would almost die for Western mining. They were so loyal and respectful and respected is probably the thing too. It was an organisation that really appreciated its people, worked them very hard, I'm sure, and expected the best from them. But they gave it back.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm a geologist, sort of exploration geologist, working in this sector, and what I find is that I made a comment in one of my videos that whenever you look at a project that Western Mining had looked at, you need to have more than a second look. And I think in that book, when I read it, it really came across, because some of these guys did things, maybe, they're all saying, things don't happen like they used to in the old days, but the dedication and the intent of working to get to the end goal, it's almost amazing. Like, there was a story about, I think it was Rutter and someone driving to do a ground mag. They had an accident, and instead of pulling up and saying, let's walk back, they said, we'll just continue the traverse, and they did.
Yeah,
right? I don't know if you remember that story.
I do, yeah. I know that Hugh was always getting criticised for his terrible driving. I don't know if it was because he was an Englishman or whatever, but he wrecked a sump going over a crest somewhere. And
that's right.
Yeah, I think they got out and kept doing the traverse on foot. And he told me that he put chewing gum on the hole to repair the sump and get it back to Port Augusta. But look, there were different times, obviously, but they were obviously not sort of OH&S type standards that we think of today. But gee, they got things done, didn't they?
Oh, there's so much things there, but to put into perspective, the whole Olympic Dam search was them saying, I think we're going to look for copper, and I think this area looks good. And that journey wasn't done in months or a few years. It was actually, if I'm not mistaken, it started in the 50s or 60s? Yeah,
that's right. It was a huge effort and a huge commitment to find copper, because after the Second World War, everything was, industry was booming, the economies were getting back on their feet, and electrification was, was a thing then. It's a thing now, but it was a thing the first time around after World War II. And there hadn't been a lot of copper found in Australia, really, to that point, other than Mount Isa, I suspect. I don't know the whole story of the inventory then, but in 57 they decided that they really needed some copper, to find some copper. And interestingly, that they chose that, and that was part of their thinking, and it goes to a lot of what they were culturally was they wanted to find things to make a difference. You know, they didn't want to find things to get rich. You know, they wanted to be, you know, rewarded and well off and do well, but there wasn't really
wasn't the
primary motivation. No, and it was like what can we do? And indeed, Douglas Haynes, likewise, he was it was his, you know, personal commitment too to find copper. He wanted to find copper because Australia needed it, so he went back to university, studied copper, you know, studied an idea about like where does the copper come from in so many of the deposits that we know about. Yeah, it was 15 years from the first copper project in Taraji River, way in the West Kimberleys, where interestingly explorers are back going to today, primarily for nickel. But Taraji River was unsuccessful. It was a huge effort to try and go to that part of the country in 1957, and Roy was personally, you know, on the ground there doing it with his wife Barbara, I think, too. That was they tried and tried. They went to Moonta here in South Australia to try again there in the early 60s. They went to Warburton in the West Musgraves. I think that's correct. I know it's
yeah, that's right.
I think it's technically Musgraves. Again to find copper. You know, none of these things were working out, and it was in the early 70s. Douglas Haynes, who had been at Warburton and seen these fantastically rich but small veins of copper, started thinking, well, where's this coming from? You know, and they had to invent their own science, really. You know, that was why Douglas Haynes went back to university, to prove that leaching of mafics was producing the source of copper, and just phenomenal sort of commitment to finding a unique idea, a competitive advantage, something that would help them find copper, because they'd looked in all the places they could think of and weren't having any success.
Yeah. You know, in today's world, you know, people would say, oh, there's a great intercept, there's a Gossan, there's things, and that's where they go to. Whereas the mentality of this was, we need to find copper, and then they did the research to go and find it, because the research was intense. And we're talking, as you said, going back to university and learning and coming up with new concepts and testing them. That's not sort of newsworthy stuff for shareholders in today's world.
No.
That would be badly frowned upon, whereas that was what they did. And shareholders was, and the other thing I looked at this story was that it was a public company, so there were shareholders there, and they were able to make that work. What was the comments, like when you talk to Harvey and this kind of guy, did you guys have that discussion at all?
Yeah, we did. It's interesting because they really struggled on a number of occasions as a company to, you know, make enough money. I can't remember all the history. I know, you know, they raced really to get the nickel discoveries into production, and that was good for a short period. But you know, nickel prices inevitably went down. Harvey said to me that the shareholders were pretty patient and okay, because they knew that the geologists knew what they were doing. You know, they were a great team. They were a crack team that had shown time and time again they could make discoveries. They'd found the bauxite in the Darling Ranges. They'd found Uliri uranium mine. They'd found the nickel, of course, which started the nickel boom. You know, there was enough faith in them to say, leave them alone. They know what they're doing. You know, we'll make discoveries and the share price will go up. You know, you'll enjoy some share price growth. You may not get dividends because we're pouring all our money into exploration every year, yeah. But you know, in the long run, things will be fine. And that was how the shareholders were okay with what they were doing. I don't know if there was a sense at the time that Western Mining was such a different company. I don't really know, because I wasn't talking to investors in
Yeah.
the 60s and 70s, but they really stood out for so many reasons. I mean, they must have, certainly there were some measures around. I mean, Western Mining spent as much on exploration in the 60s and the 50s, certainly, as BHP was, as Conzinc Rio Tinto was, and they were 3 to 6 times the size. I mean, it was a small company. It was not necessarily a very big or wealthy company, but it just poured money into exploration, and it had made discoveries. So everyone said, "Okay, you're going to make some more."
Yeah, I think I hold, rightly or wrongly, I do when I hear people, oh, he's from Western Mining, I tend to see that their success follows them as they move on. So, and then when I'm reading this, and by the way, there's a lot of detail in here, which as I was reading, I'm thinking, geez, there's a lot of little bits and pieces that detail the how she has put it, the nature that how they work, right? It was just, and that parallel to what I think of people with a Western mining background is that they seem to just get things done, and the success follows them. It's like a culture that's being built.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, they were very driven people, and as I was saying before, it's not necessarily about making themselves well off. It was like they were curious people, like scientifically curious as to why things were the way they were, and how does that relate to finding an ore body. They had that great curiosity, and they were just driven to find answers, and as well as driven to do things like, well, let's find some copper because that would be a really good and necessary thing for Australia at this point. So there was a lot of cultural things, and then there were just individuals too who were just really wise people and good, smart geologists. I'm thinking of Jim Laylaw, for example, who was the leader of the group that pulled together all the concept for going onto the Stuart Shelf. He had all these really smart scientists. Some of them were quite eclectic and didn't necessarily get along that well, but Jim was such a brilliant leader of these people. And at the real crunch times, when it came, they drilled an initial hole and found a great unexpected discovery which they didn't even know what they had. It wasn't the model either of what they were looking for. They had that first hole, then they drilled another 8 holes, and the results weren't as good. They were getting worse generally, and there was really a lot of things that could have happened at that point. Do they keep drilling these really difficult, expensive holes through hematite-rich rocks that are just going through drill bits like nothing? Do they keep going or whatever? And it was Jim Laylaw really that said, no, we keep going. We haven't got an answer yet. We can't rule it out. And it was that 10th hole where they found another fantastic intercept. So it was people that knew how to lead others and knew how to find ore bodies. Really, they thought, well, we don't have the answer yet. We can't give up. We need to keep drilling. We need to find a way to find a bit of extra money and keep going. And that's almost instinctual. That's the sort of thing that comes into play too when you sort of hear about some of the people who are what you call ore finders. They just seem to have the magic element to find an ore body when others don't. So there were just great individuals and a great culture.
Because that speaks volumes of what mineral exploration is, right? Because when people think, I use the term, people think mineral exploration is like overnight success. Oh, great, they've announced this great thing, it just happened. But it's all the work that was done by, today's world was by previous guys, but they didn't have previous guys to work from. They had to create that. And mineral exploration, you drill one hole, fantastic. 8 holes later, you're thinking, geez, we've spent all this money. And lo and behold, the 10th hole, which is the Olympic Dam story, was they had, I think it was 200 or 300 metres sulfite mineralisation and going 2% of copper or something like that. And whereas the first hole, they didn't even know they had copper at the bottom. They didn't see the core.
No.
Like that in the book you were saying. They didn't even know until they handwritten essays came back and says, oh, we got this copper in there.
Yeah.
So in that sense, they didn't even know what they had, and when they did see the numbers, they didn't even know how to work it out.
No. The model that they had was sediment-hosted copper, basically. They expected to find it in the cover, sitting on fault blocks of mafic rocks, and of course it was in the basement. And interestingly, they didn't tell anyone for many years, for some time, that it was the basement where the discovery was made. There were people scrambling up to the Stuart Shelf, once the first news came out, but they still didn't know whether they should be drilling the basement or looking in the cover. There was a bit of that competitive subterfuge going on. But but the model was that copper's coming out of the basalt, out of the mafics, and there was a copper source. It just happened to be somewhere else. And I don't pretend to know the latest thinking about IOCGs and everything about how they get there, but they went in there with an idea that there should be metal here. There's a reason, there's a mineral system, there's a mechanism that says that we can expect to find some metal here, and they just happened to find it in the basement rather than the cover. So
it's when you just that last few sentences you talked about, and I've had a lot of conversation with companies, with Coffee Samso and things like that, and they all seem to fall recently that they're looking for these deep cover stuff. They're looking for deep structures, which is what Western Mining was trying to work, and they're trying to figure out where could we find what could bring this up. And you comment, they just knew that there was metal there, just didn't know how, where to drill. And then eventually when they got it, they're still scratching their heads. But so in that sense, it's the mineralizing system that they're looking for, not the actual metal, right? They're trying to find where is the cooking pot, and then let's go and figure out what's in the cooking pot. Yeah. Was that transferred in your conversation with these guys?
Yes, it was. Yeah, like some people would say, oh well, Western Mining was a bit of a lucky accident, because they went there looking for sediment-hosted copper, and they ended up with an IOCG, which really wasn't really a category of a mineral system at the time. So it was just a lucky hit, but it wasn't. It was, as I was saying, they had worked out that there should be a mineral system there. They went all over Australia looking for basalts that had enough copper in them in the first place, and then evidence that copper had been leached out or ordered out of the system somehow. So they really were working on mineral systems, in the 1970s, before people would really, mineral system became a thing in 1990s, with Leslie Wyborn and her colleagues at Geoscience Australia. So, but 20 years earlier, Western Mining was thinking mineral systems was how to find copper in a really decent amount of copper in a new place that would give them, the success they really yearned for.
What would be good if you were able to share with us is, there was a talk about, O'Driscoll talking about the big lineament structures, and there was geophysics, and they even used seismic and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's quite, it's not new age technology then, but compared to today, they're probably very like cart and wheels, and we're using EV cars today, right? But that must have been sort of a contentious thing, when they're sitting around the table arguing about, are you right or wrong, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of their ideas were quite out there. Western Mining was so committed to trying anything, as long as it was science. They didn't want to try wacky ideas, but
no diviners.
No, they were very much about the science. Roy Woodall was absolutely passionate about finding new ways of doing things, better ways, I mean, interestingly, in the 1930s, they were taking aerial photographs of Kalgoorlie, 200,000 square kilometres. They were flying planes in the 1930s with aerial photographs because they thought that would help them find gold, and they didn't understand then, well, it's all regolith, there's nothing to see in most of the country. And Avi said to me, at that point we were called the Wasting Money Corporation, because of, that was regarded as a really stupid thing to do. But, they weren't stupid, they were trying things that would open up new opportunities. It was always about what can we innovate, what can we do differently to give us an advantage where other people, haven't found it yet. So the lineament stuff was really, at the boundaries of, science. Some people believe in it, some people don't. Roy very much believed in it, and it was one of the elements, but it was the geophysics to find, and they had pre-competitive geoscience then, which was pretty amazing, really. The South Australian government had flown, I think it was BMR had flown gravity and magnetics as recently as the late 60s. They only just had, some of the pre-competitive they needed a few years before they went looking up on the Stuart Shelf. So that was important to actually going there. They wouldn't have gone there, I think, if they didn't have the regional magnetics and gravity that they needed. So, but yeah, they would try things, and sending Douglas Haynes to university to do a PhD in a mineral system effectively was I mean, that's pretty out there, isn't it? They would pay, I think he was on half salary or whatever for the years that he had to do that. So, that's the sort of stuff. Do we need to do that now because there's so much going on? Yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of information out there to help people with their mineral systems and all that, but it's one thing for that to be going on in government agencies and academia. It's another thing to have your own people, just wedded to that idea, wedded to these ideas and passionate about these new, innovative ways of looking at mineral systems and thinking about them.
I think there's a lot of data and out there now. I mean, the South Australian government has done a lot in terms of getting the information out, and so has the West Australian Mines Department and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, you still need that guy, that Douglas Haynes, to sit there and the Driscoll to look at that and interpret it and go, blue plus red equals this, and maybe what is that? Because interpretation is very, very fluid, right? And also having that, the next thing is obviously the gut feel and the courage to put that as a model.
Well, exactly. You've got to put your money where your mouth is, don't you?
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought was interesting about Western mining, we touched on before, was, they got things done, and maybe you can't do that now, I don't know, but they would, they persisted with Olympic Dam, they kept drilling it, to hole number 10. Even when they went, when they went on from number 10, there was still another 10 holes that they really hadn't found the ore body. There was just so much difficulty in nailing down that ore body. Hole number 10 had hit a little pod of mineralisation that was not near the ore body they would eventually find. So, you had to be persistent and keep drilling and drilling at the right times, but on other times you had to know when to give up. And that was another thing that struck me in the book, was that they would drill something. I might be talking about nickel in Cambodia or whatever, or anywhere. But if they drilled something and there was just nothing really to see, well, they'd give up. They would walk away sometimes from one hole if it was a dead loss, and then they would go and drill the next thing. A few weeks later, they would move on quickly, keep trying things, try multiple targets, drill, because the more things you try, the more likely you will have success. You have to know when to stop as well as when not to stop. So that's where the leadership comes in, of really good people that know, well, do we really have the answers here? Should we be giving up? Or is this one a waste of time and we just need to pack up our rig and move on to the next one? So it's really, managing those risks and making those decisions are really critical, I think, to overall success.
I think one of the ending comments was that I think I'm not sure who you quoted. It could have been Avi or someone said that maybe Western mining was too small for Olympic Dam, but definitely anyone big would not have found Olympic Dam.
Yeah.
I found that quite intriguing because in some ways I think that could be the truth, because it's only that persistence in which we keep going back on that word that discovered Olympic Dam.
Yeah.
Just to give a history, I mean, Western mining, I think, started in 1933. I think then BP came in on that Olympic Dam thing in 1979 for 49%. And then BP had enough, sold it back to them in 93. And then BHP took them over for $9 billion in 2005. But that journey, that time when they had discovered Olympic Dam to when BHP took them over, it was the worst possible uranium price and copper price. They persevered. They had expansions in that time. And unfortunately or fortunately for BHP is that at 2005 is when you saw the price start to move up. That again is another thing about Western mining, right? They knew they had something big, and obviously when BHP came over, they did another relook at it. It was 4 times bigger than what Western mining had thought. And that's the complexity of Olympic Dam. That was the prize. I think the appreciation of Olympic Dam is sort of undermined in some point because the numbers are so big, you just,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a hard ore body to exploit. Western mining managed to get the mine going, build all the infrastructure, and they had to do exceptional things to build smelters and refineries in the middle of the desert to make it work because the uranium was such a complication. And they never really got much of a payback of anything from it. But that they were there to build mines and produce metals and do the best they could with with the ore they had. I mean, I'm sure they might think maybe did we develop it big enough or the right way? But yeah, it was a huge ore body that was really needed a major to help develop.
And they had to deal with the political issue of uranium, and when they got over that. And at one time I heard someone said that they had 40% of the world's uranium supply. If a war collapsed on the pit, production stopped, uranium would skyrocket.
Right.
That's the amount of uranium they had, right? Or that's the amount of metals that they had, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a monster as a uranium resource.
Yeah.
It was a very, it took 13 years now, 13 years from discovery to getting into production, which these days is probably pretty typical. In the 70s and 80s, that was a very, very long time to get it into production. There were unimaginable, I mean, the exploration story of persistence and innovation and, good management was one part, and then the production. I mean, there's probably another book that I haven't written about how they managed to get it into production. One of the fascinating pieces of history is BP was brought in as a partner to bankroll the drill out and the feasibility study. They committed, worked out in the book, this is 10 years ago now, so it was $300 million in 2010 money to do that, drill out and get it to the feasibility. Now, BP committed to do that when uranium mining was banned in South Australia. It was phenomenal. And there was a lot of clever sort of strategy in terms of, well, how do we play this? How are we going to get this through? So it was just fascinating, yeah.
Because, I mean, I think your words or you quoted someone saying that, Western mining was the Google/Apple of its time. And I don't think that's far from the truth, really. Yeah. From what we've discussed, and also Olympic Dam was the 3rd discovery by Western mining in 10 years. So they were a company of success, right?
Yeah.
In those times there, and the fascinating thing is, it would be 20 years after Olympic Dam that Prominent Hill was discovered. And another after that is Carrapateena, who was sort of discovered after that. It was 16 years of the vendor trying to get this thing drilled, and he was persistent because Driscoll told him that there's a structure there and you must follow it, you must, and lo and behold, Carrapateena existed, you know. And when we look at where Olympic Dam was, it's the typical story of, you know, where people said, "Oh, there's nothing there, you can't do this, too hard." Like the Yamana gold belt, which Goldroyd made the discovery. It was stated as too young, not the right type, and we're almost 10 million ounces of gold there. Tropicana was discovered in the Fraser Range and Nova Bollinger. Then the latest one is the Julimar thing. You know, it's that unknown that drives people to chase this exploration, right? So even in that existing area, I mean, the geology is still fairly
Oh, it's a hard place to make discoveries. Yeah, it's very deep cover. I mean, if you're just drilling, you know, gravity mag bullseyes, you know, there's thousands of them up there. You know, it's not a recipe for success. So, but there's a lot of really interesting science going on, particularly with the Geological Survey in South Australia in terms of, you know, chemistry, isotopes. You know, all these sort of vectors are being produced now in terms of how do we identify the mineral system footprint in the cover or in the basement as well. Sorry, to get in. So you would think that maybe we'll see more happening. I mean, Oak Dam is a great discovery. That is a re-drill of a Western Mining prospect. But BHP, to their credit, decided to drill further and harder and, you know, try something a bit further from the sort of main focus. So, and that was guided by mineral systems thinking that's come out of GA. The BHP have acknowledged that. So it's getting easier, but it's still bloody hard to find IOCGs. Yeah.
Just to give more context, you know, by mid-1987, this all came from your book, 234,000 metres of diamond drilling, 240,000 metres of RC, 143,000 metres underground drilling. That's a lot of drilling.
Yeah.
In I think that more refers to the actual deposit itself, right? Just trying to figure it out.
The drill out and it's a huge order, and it goes to what you were saying before about you know, being too big for Western Mining. I mean, it is a massive ore body that requires a lot of resources and a lot of money to drill out and work out how to exploit. And you know, but juniors are the ones that I don't know why. I mean, I don't know why majors can't be at least, you know, innovative and more, you know, in terms of the WMC culture, perhaps. But it's the juniors that are really driving the innovation and discovery. And you know, it's
juniors take all the risk and the big guys come in.
Yeah, they're the least able to afford it, but they seem to manage to do it. And so that's, you know, Western Mining wasn't exactly a junior, but they weren't a big company either.
Yeah, comparatively, they were definitely not one. You know, what's David Upton doing these days? I mean, since writing the book, what's
Yeah, thanks. So it's really sort of brought me back into you know, loving exploration and geology and writing about it. So I do a bit of writing for publications, but one of the things that struck me in this book was the importance of the pre-competitive and the idea that there's just such fabulously good ideas and you know, leads, if you like, as to where and how to explore. That's in the data or in the research that's completely free. So I have developed a bit of an interest and a fascination with pre-competitive. I publish a site now called Pre-Competitive Review, and that's all I do is look at what's coming out from the government agencies, what's coming out from academia, and I just quite really love looking through, you know, technical papers and thinking, because the academics always bury the lead, the good story is always down the bottom, or you can't get the context to understand it. So I try and pick the eyes out of the information and keep an eye on what government's doing. There's just a ton of stuff coming out from government nationally and at state levels. So yeah, that's something that is going quite well for me to provide a service, really, to help the next Western minings, hopefully.
I'll have your links and things like that on all our socials and things like that. But it's so much. Sometimes so much information is actually not good, because it's just so much noise. You don't know where to start. But I mean, to give an example, the amount of information, and we can go back years and look at logs, and there's cores being kept, and then there's new information. I think South Australia just is doing a lot of surveys. CSIRO did a big, huge thing in South Australia. They've got all the hydrochemistry out there showing where you see most anomalies. It's amazing how much information is out there.
Yeah, I think it's the next discoveries are in that information somewhere. I think a lot of them, whether it's the drill core or whether it's new isotope research telling you where a crustal boundary is now understood to be. The crustal boundaries and major faults are well understood now to be the conduits and the place to be. The tectonic settings are getting more and more well understood all the time. So yeah, I think that you've got to have that big picture to understand perhaps what's pulling together to make all the things in your favour in any particular area where you might want to go and explore, and go and explore somewhere where other people haven't. Just because it hasn't been drilled or hasn't been a popular area, that doesn't mean anything. As Western mining proved, I mean, there was that far north on the Stuart Shelf, there was really nothing. There was some copper further south at Mount Gunson, but nothing like IOCGs.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that I commend that this book. The more I've read it, obviously, prior to this conversation, I went back to the book and I made it into a textbook. I highlighted, Steve, like how we used to do in our chemistry books, right?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and, thank you so much for being so kind about it. Yeah.
It's very instrumental. I think you depicted the whole journey, and you can probably do more, but in the volume you've depicted the journey well. And I think it's a book I would recommend people read, because especially who have interest in this, and then you understand what mineral exploration is all about and what it took and what it means. Because when guys announce something out there and it's either good or bad, that's not determining the asset, right? It's about the journey, because you need to eliminate things, and I think these guys eliminated a lot of things. I remember they had 5 targets, the key targets. Then it was defined to 2. Then they defined it to 1. And then within the 1, we're still talking about square kilometres, a huge area, which then they had to break it down to prospects. And so it is a journey that's very involved. And I think
it is. Yeah. It's. There are a million ways to miss an ore body. There are a million ways to miss Olympic Dam, but they didn't miss it. They managed to do everything right through just so many reasons that they found it. Yeah.
I mean, they even talked about where they only had a specific budget. If they didn't go through that extra 50 metres, they couldn't have got that last bit. And if they didn't get that last bit, they would have got 0. And they would have moved on. So they were that fine a line of finding it and not finding it. And I think it's a fascinating read. I'm not a reader, I'm not a book critic, but I thought it was a great book. I've kept it ever, and I thought I lost it at one point.
Well, thank you very much, Noel. Yeah, it's great. It's been, it's been a reason. I don't know how many books you should sell writing about mineral exploration, but it's been a bit of a mainstay of the industry. People have talked to me about it over the years, that it's something that they know and have read. So I'm quite surprised at how many people have read it, but I'm glad it's found a place. And it's a history book, so it's there now. Those facts will never go away. So I'm very pleased to look back on it. And
I'm happy that you did it.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm going to have a couple of books that I'm going to give away. I haven't figured out how to give it away to you guys yet, but I'll figure a way of trying to share it. But last words from you. What's the summation of the Olympic Dam story that you could pitch to these guys and say, go away with that, and hopefully you'll be better off?
I think 2 words, maybe 3. The word creativity sort of came to me over and over again writing the book. I mean, they were, yes, it's innovation, but they were creative in so many ways in terms of how they imagine where an ore body might be, and why it might be there. So it's not a word you think of in terms of, an industry based on science and, hard-headed management, but creativity was a really big thing in terms of finding new opportunities. Yes, the science was absolutely fundamental. I think we all know that now. Perhaps they didn't know it as much in the 70s when Western Mining was blazing that trail so clearly. And persistence. I'm going to get to 4 words here. Persistence is my 3rd word. You just can't. You've got to keep going. Whether that's just at the drill program level or at a major level in terms of trying to find a project. I was going to say faith is the final word, the 4th word. It was really just the faith of the explorationists in the science, but the faith of the board in their, in turn in the scientists and what they were doing. Without the board that was just backing them, really just without question, year after year, decade after decade, that was absolutely fundamental. You can't drill anything if you haven't got the money, and the board backed them because they believed in what their people were doing.
I mean, you've spoken to Yavi, Sir Yavi, I think. Yes, I should say. What would be his last words? Or, partaking his wisdom?
Pretty much what I've summed up, I think, already. I think he would say those things. He was very insightful and helpful for me to understand the company and the people that made the company in the first place, right from the earliest days in the 1930s. Will Robinson, I can't remember his first name, but and Lindsay Clark, who was had 40 years at the company before Avi was in the sort of in the chair. He told an interesting story about Lindsay Clark, and Lindsay Clark was sort of the culture of the place. He would go and visit, operations, projects, and he really just wanted to talk to the geologists about what they were doing and what they were finding and why they were doing what they were doing. He was just fascinated with exploration and science. And there's a quote in the book where Avi says, "Look, I'd say to him, why don't you go and talk to some of the production people for a while and find out what they're doing." And Lindsay Clark would go and do that for a day, and then he'd go back to talking to the geologists for the whole week. It's just sort of a fascinating passion for exploration and discovery, and it's kind of like curiosity and wonder and how do these things work and why are they there. It's probably the thing that sums them all up.
Yeah. Look, David, we could go on forever. I would love to, but
thank you so much for your time. Well, for your time and your interest in the book. Yeah, really, really.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's definitely a manual of exploration, manual of how things should be done, and creativity. Is really about going for that looking where people haven't not looked. But again, thank you.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have a conversation again.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to talk with you. Thank you.